The dust-laden winds of Montana Territory carried whispers of a new arrival in the small settlement of Silver Creek, and Abigail Lawson clutched her weathered carpetbag tighter as the stagecoach rumbled to a stop in front of the town's only hotel. The year was 1878, and at 23 years of age, Abigail had left behind everything familiar to accept a position as the town's new schoolteacher. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she surveyed the single dusty street lined with wooden buildings, wondering if she had made the gravest mistake of her life. "End of the line, miss," the driver called, already unloading her trunk. Abigail smoothed her simple gray traveling dress and adjusted her bonnet before descending from the coach. The journey from Boston had been arduous, leaving her exhausted and disheveled. A far cry from the composed, presentable schoolteacher she had hoped to appear as upon arrival. "You must be Miss Lawson," a plump woman with a kind face approached. "I'm Mrs. Benton, owner of the boarding house. We've been expecting you." "Yes, thank you for meeting me," Abigail replied, relieved to see a friendly face. "I hope I haven't kept you waiting." "Not at all, dear. The stage is always late through these parts." Mrs. Benton gestured to a young man who came forward to collect Abigail's trunk. "You must be tired. Let's get you settled." As they walked down the wooden sidewalk, Abigail felt eyes upon her from every direction. Silver Creek wasn't large, perhaps 30 buildings in all, but its inhabitants seemed deeply curious about their new schoolteacher. "Don't mind them," Mrs. Benton said, noticing Abigail's discomfort. "We don't get many new faces, especially educated Eastern ladies." The boarding house was a simple two-story structure, clean and well kept despite its modest appearance. Mrs. Benton showed her to a small but comfortable room on the second floor, furnished with a narrow bed, a writing desk, and a washstand. "The school is just down the road, Mrs. Benton explained. "Term starts in 3 days, which should give you time to settle in and prepare. There'll be about 15 children, ages 6 to 16. "Thank you," Abigail said, sinking onto the edge of the bed once Mrs. Benton had departed. She released a long breath, allowing her carefully maintained composure to slip just slightly. The mirror above the washstand reflected a young woman with brown hair pulled into a severe bun, unremarkable features, and tired blue eyes. In Boston, she had been consistently overlooked plain, bookish Abigail, whose only remarkable quality was her education. She had hoped that here, in this frontier town, she might define herself by her capabilities rather than her appearance. Yet already she felt the weight of judgment. The next morning, Abigail rose early, determined to familiarize herself with the town and the schoolhouse. Silver Creek was already bustling with activity despite the early hour. She nodded politely to those she passed, noting the curious glances. The schoolhouse sat on the edge of town, a simple one-room building with rows of rough-hewn benches and desks. An American flag hung limply from a pole outside, and a small bell was mounted above the entrance. Abigail pulled the key she'd been given from her pocket and entered, immediately assessing what supplies she would need. She spent hours organizing books, cleaning the chalkboard, and arranging the space to her liking. By midday, she was covered in dust, but satisfied with her progress. As she stepped outside to shake out her apron, she noticed a rider approaching. He rode a chestnut stallion with practiced ease, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the mountains rising behind the town. His face was partially obscured by the brim of his hat, but she could see the strong line of his jaw bronzed by the sun. As he drew closer, he tipped his hat in greeting. "Afternoon, madam. You must be the new schoolteacher." "Yes," Abigail replied, suddenly conscious of her dusty appearance. "Abigail Lawson. Yancey Fairchild," he introduced himself, dismounting with fluid grace. Up close, she could see that his eyes were a startling shade of green, crinkling at the corners as he smiled. "I ranch about 5 miles outside town. Got 2 youngsters who will be in your class." "I look forward to meeting them," she said formally, trying not to stare at the tall cowboy before her. "Need any help getting set up here?" he offered, glancing at the schoolhouse. "Town council was supposed to fix that leaky roof before you arrived." "Oh," Abigail hesitated. "I hadn't noticed any leaks, but I suppose it hasn't rained since my arrival." Yancey laughed, a deep, pleasant sound. Well, it's only a matter of time in these parts. Mind if I take a look? Before she could respond, he was already striding toward the building. Abigail followed, watching as he expertly assessed the roof from inside, pointing out water stains she had overlooked. I can have this fixed by tomorrow, he said. Got the supplies on my wagon, was heading to the mercantile anyway. That's very kind, Mr. Fairchild, but I wouldn't want to impose. No imposition, he said easily. And it's Yancey. Mr. Fairchild was my father, God rest him. There was something about his open manner that put Abigail at ease. Most men made her uncomfortable with their obvious disinterest or, worse, their condescension. But Yancey Fairchild spoke to her as if she were worth speaking to. True to his word, Yancey returned the following day with lumber and tools. Abigail tried to focus on her lesson plans while he worked on the roof, but found herself repeatedly distracted by the sound of his movements overhead. At midday, she ventured outside with a pitcher of water. Would you care for something to drink, Mr. Yancey? He climbed down the ladder with remarkable agility for such a large man. Much obliged, he said, accepting the cup she offered. His fingers brushed hers in the exchange, and Abigail felt an unexpected flutter in her chest. You've made impressive progress, she observed, noting the newly repaired section of the roof. Almost finished, he replied, wiping his brow with a bandana. Should hold tight through the winter storms now. I appreciate your assistance, Abigail said formally. Please let me know what I owe you for the materials. Yancey looked genuinely surprised. Nothing at all, Miss Lawson. Town should have done this weeks ago. Besides, my kids will be learning under this roof. How old are your children? She asked, curious about the family of this intriguing man. Emma's 8 and Joseph's 10, he answered. Smart as whips, both of them, though they've had precious little formal schooling. And Mrs. Fairchild? Abigail asked before she could stop herself, immediately regretting the presumption. A shadow crossed Yancey's face. Sarah passed 4 years back, influenza. I'm terribly sorry, Abigail said, genuinely contrite. I shouldn't have pried. No need for apologies, he said, his smile returning though it didn't quite reach his eyes. It's natural to wonder who your students' parents are. He finished the roof repair by mid-afternoon, and Abigail insisted on making him tea before he departed. They sat on the schoolhouse steps, an unlikely pair, the dusty rancher and the prim schoolteacher, sharing a quiet moment as the sun began its descent toward the mountains. So what brings a Boston lady to Montana territory? Yancey asked, stretching his long legs before him. Abigail hesitated, unsure how to explain without revealing too much of herself. I wanted to make a difference, she finally said. In Boston, teaching positions are highly competitive, and I found myself overlooked. Out here, where education is scarce, I thought perhaps I could be of real value. Overlooked? Yancey seemed genuinely puzzled. Their loss is Silver Creek's gain, I'd say. His words, simple as they were, warmed her in a way she wasn't prepared for. Before she could formulate a response, he stood and dusted off his trousers. Better be getting back. Got chores waiting, and those 2 wildcats of mine are probably giving Mrs. Peterson fits. He settled his hat on his head. School starts tomorrow, doesn't it? Yes, Abigail confirmed, rising as well. I'm rather nervous, to be honest. You'll do fine, he assured her. The kids around here aren't any different from kids anywhere else. Just show them you care and they'll come around. With a tip of his hat, Yancey mounted his horse and rode out, leaving Abigail to wonder about the curious sensation that had settled in her chest. The first day of school arrived with bright autumn sunshine. Abigail dressed carefully in her best teaching dress, navy blue with white collar and cuffs, and arranged her hair in its usual severe bun. Standing before the small mirror, she critically assessed her reflection. There was nothing remarkable about her appearance. Her features were symmetrical but unmemorable, her complexion clear but lacking the fashionable pallor prized in Boston society. She had long ago accepted that she was, at best, plain, but today was not about appearances. Today was about establishing herself as an educator worthy of respect. With a deep breath, she gathered her books and headed to the schoolhouse. By 8 o'clock, children began arriving, some on foot, others on horseback or in wagons with parents. Abigail stood at the door, greeting each one and attempting to commit names to memory. She recognized Yancey's children immediately. They had his green eyes, though Emma's hair was a light blonde while Joseph's was darker like his father's. "Miss Lawson," Joseph said politely, tipping his small hat just as his father might have done. "Good morning, Joseph," she replied with a warm smile, "and you must be Emma. I'm very pleased to meet you both." Emma regarded her solemnly. "Pa says you're from Boston and know lots of things." "Your father is very kind," Abigail said. "I hope to learn many things from all of you as well." The day progressed better than Abigail had dared hope. Despite the wide range of ages and abilities, the children were mostly attentive and respectful. Even the older boys, whom she had worried might resent a female teacher, seemed willing to give her a chance. By the time the final bell rang, Abigail was exhausted but exhilarated. As the children filed out, she noticed Yancey waiting outside, leaning against his horse. Emma ran to him, chattering excitedly, while Joseph followed at a more measured pace, attempting to emulate his father's dignified manner. Abigail busied herself with tidying up, not wanting to appear to be waiting for him, though her awareness of his presence was acute. When a shadow fell across her desk, she looked up to find him standing in the doorway, hat in hand. "Successful first day?" he asked. "I believe so," she replied, unable to suppress a smile. "Your children are a delight, Mr. Fairchild." "Yancey," he corrected gently. "And they're good kids, though they have their moments. Emma's been talking my ear off about everything you taught them today. She's quite bright," Abigail observed. "They both are." "Gets that from their mother," Yancey said, a fond sadness in his expression. Sarah was always reading something or other. There was a moment of comfortable silence before Yancey spoke again. "Town's having a harvest dance Saturday night. Thought you might like to know, being new and all. Good way to meet folks." "Oh," Abigail said, surprised by what seemed like an invitation. "I'm not much for dancing, I'm afraid." Yancey shrugged, his expression unreadable. "Doesn't have to be about dancing. Food's usually good, and it's a chance to get to know the community outside of school." "I'll consider it," Abigail said, not wanting to commit. "Hope to see you there then," he replied, settling his hat back on his head. "Kids are waiting. Good day, Miss Lawson." "Abigail," she called impulsively as he turned to leave. "If I'm to call you Yancey, then fair is fair." His smile was worth the momentary breach of propriety. "Abigail it is, then." The remainder of the week passed in a blur of lessons and adjustments. Abigail found herself settling into a routine, growing more comfortable with her students and the rhythms of the small town. Each afternoon, Yancey would arrive to collect his children, and each time their brief conversations left her feeling oddly flustered. By Saturday, Abigail had decided against attending the harvest dance. What was the point? She would stand awkwardly at the edge of the gathering, a plain outsider watching others enjoy themselves. She had experienced enough such evenings in Boston. As dusk fell, she sat in her room at the boarding house with a book, trying to ignore the sounds of merriment drifting from the town hall. Mrs. Benton had already left, dressed in her finest and clearly surprised that Abigail wasn't joining her. A knock at her door startled her. Opening it, she found Yancey Fairchild standing in the hallway, dressed in what was clearly his best shirt and vest, his usually unruly hair tamed somewhat for the occasion. "Evening, Abigail," he said. "I was hoping to escort you to the dance." She stared at him in confusion. I didn't think." "It's a community gathering," he said simply, "and you're part of this community now." Something in his earnest expression broke through her reservations. "Give me a moment to change," she heard herself say. Her options were limited. A dark green dress she had brought for special occasions was the best she could offer. She quickly changed and attempted to arrange her hair in a less severe style, allowing a few curls to frame her face. When she emerged, Yancey's expression was difficult to read, but there was a warmth in his eyes that made her flush. "You look lovely," he said, offering his arm. The town hall was decorated with autumn leaves and harvest bounty, lanterns casting a golden glow over the proceedings. A small band played lively tunes, and couples were already dancing. Children darted between groups of adults playing their own games. Abigail immediately spotted Emma and Joseph among them. "Where are your children staying tonight?" She asked, realizing Yancey wouldn't leave them alone at the ranch with the Petersons, he explained. Their youngest is Joseph's age. They often stay over when I need to be in town late. As they entered, heads turned, and Abigail felt the familiar discomfort of being observed and judged. But Yancey's steady presence beside her gave her confidence she might not otherwise have possessed. He introduced her to ranchers, merchants, and farmers, many of whom were parents of her students. Most were welcoming, though she detected reserve from some of the women, particularly those with unmarried sons or brothers. It was a dynamic she understood all too well. She wasn't perceived as competition. "Care to dance?" Yancey asked as the band struck up a waltz. Abigail hesitated. "I warned you I'm not much of a dancer." "Then I'm in good company," he replied with a grin, "because neither am I. We can be terrible together." His self-deprecating humor won a genuine laugh from her, and she allowed him to lead her onto the floor. His hand was warm and steady at her waist, guiding her through the steps with more grace than he had claimed to possess. Despite her nervousness, Abigail found herself relaxing into the rhythm, enjoying the simple pleasure of movement and music. "You're a fine dancer, Mr. Fairchild," she teased as they completed a turn. "And you're a terrible liar, Miss Lawson," he returned with a wink. They danced twice more before taking a break for refreshments. Yancey brought her a cup of punch, and they found seats at the edge of the hall watching the festivities. "Your students seem to be enjoying themselves," Abigail observed, noticing several of the older children participating in the dancing now. "They're good kids, most of them," Yancey agreed. "Life out here isn't easy, but it builds character." "What brought you to Montana?" Abigail asked, realizing she knew little about his background. "Opportunity," he replied. "I came out after the war with barely $1 to my name, worked as a hand on several ranches, saved every penny. When a small spread came up for sale 7 years back, I took the chance. Been building it ever since." "You fought in the war?" Abigail asked, noting he would have been quite young. "Last year of it," he confirmed. "Joined up at 16, saw enough to know I never wanted to see more." His expression grew distant. "Came west like a lot of boys did after, looking for a fresh start. And you found it here?" Yancey's gaze scanned the room, taking in the familiar faces. "Found something worth building, at least. Met Sarah 2 years after I arrived. She was the doctor's daughter, educated and refined. Everyone thought she was crazy to marry a poor cowboy with nothing but dreams. But she saw something in you worth believing in," Abigail said softly. His eyes returned to her, searching. "She did. Finest thing that ever happened to me until the children came." "I'm sorry you lost her," Abigail said, meaning it deeply. "So am I," Yancey replied. "But life goes on, has to, especially when you've got little ones depending on you." He smiled, though there was still sadness behind it. "What about you?" "Family back in Boston, my parents," Abigail said. "And 2 older sisters, both married with children. I'm the odd one out, I'm afraid. More interested in books than beaux, as my mother often laments." "Nothing odd about having a mind of your own," Yancey observed. "Must have taken courage to come all this way alone." Abigail had never considered her decision in terms of courage. Desperation, perhaps. A desire to escape the constant, subtle reminders of her inadequacies. But before she could respond, the band started a lively reel, and several children, including Emma, rushed over. "Pa, come dance," Emma pleaded, tugging at Yancey's hand. "Miss Lawson, too," laughing, Yancey allowed himself to be pulled to his feet. "Can't refuse a lady," he said with a mock bow to his daughter before turning to Abigail. "Care to join us?" The rest of the evening passed in a blur of music, laughter, and conversation. By the time the last dance was called, Abigail realized she had enjoyed herself more than she had at any social gathering in recent memory. As the band played a final waltz, Yancey led her onto the floor once more. "Thank you for coming tonight," he said as they moved together through the steps. "Thank you for persuading me," she replied honestly. "It's good for the children to see their teacher as part of the community," he said, then added with a hint of mischief, "though I admit my motives weren't entirely about the children's education." Abigail felt warmth rise to her cheeks. "Mr. Fairchild, are you flirting with me?" "Trying to," he admitted with a chuckle. "Not doing a very good job of it, am I?" "I wouldn't know," she confessed. "I don't have much experience with flirtation. His expression softened. "Hard to believe." "Not really," she said, averting her gaze. "I'm not. Men don't generally, that is to say." "Abigail," Yancey interrupted gently, "look at me." She reluctantly met his eyes, expecting to find pity or worse, amusement. Instead, there was only warmth and something that looked remarkably like admiration. "I've enjoyed your company this evening," he said simply, "and I'd like to enjoy it again if you're amenable." The music ended before she could formulate a response, and they were swept into the general exodus as the gathering dispersed. Yancey escorted her back to the boarding house, their conversation returning to safer topics: the school, the approaching winter, local events. At her door, he removed his hat and stood somewhat awkwardly, suddenly less sure of himself than he had been all evening. "Thank you for a lovely evening," Abigail said, filling the silence. "The pleasure was mine," he replied. "Would you? That is, I often bring the children into town for Sunday services. Perhaps you join us for dinner afterward, Mrs. Peterson usually watches them while I attend to business in town, but I'm sure they'd enjoy your company." "I'd like that," Abigail said, surprised by her own eagerness. "Until tomorrow, then," Yancey said, and with a slight bow, he departed. Abigail entered her room in a state of bemused wonder. Had Yancey Fairchild truly sought her company? And more incredibly, had she enjoyed it so thoroughly? She removed her dress and prepared for bed, her mind replaying moments from the evening: the warmth of his hand at her waist, the sound of his laughter, the intensity of his gaze when it rested on her. For the first time since arriving in Silver Creek, Abigail fell asleep with a smile on her face. The following weeks established a pattern. Abigail taught during the week, and on Sundays she joined Yancey and his children for dinner after church. Occasionally, Yancey would appear at the schoolhouse on a weekday afternoon, ostensibly to discuss his children's progress, but lingering to help with tasks: chopping firewood for the stove, fixing a broken window, or simply walking her back to the boarding house. With each encounter, Abigail found herself more drawn to the quiet rancher. He was unlike any man she had known in Boston: straightforward in his speech, unashamed of his lack of formal education, but possessed of a natural intelligence and curiosity that often surprised her. He listened when she spoke of books or ideas, not with the patronizing air she had grown accustomed to, but with genuine interest. The children, too, had become dear to her. Emma was affectionate and lively, while Joseph was more reserved but thoughtful. Both clearly adored their father and had gradually extended that trust to include Abigail. As autumn deepened toward winter, Silver Creek prepared for the coming cold. Abigail found herself included in community preparations, helping to can preserves, joining quilting circles, learning the rhythms of frontier life from the more experienced women. Though some still regarded her with curiosity or mild suspicion, most had accepted her presence. One crisp November afternoon, as Abigail dismissed her students, she found not only Yancey waiting outside but also an unfamiliar wagon laden with supplies. "Afternoon, Abigail," Yancey greeted her, helping Emma and Joseph into the wagon. "Got a favor to ask if you're willing." "Of course," she replied, curious. "Need to pick up some supplies from the railway station in Clearwater," he explained. "It's about 2 hours' drive. Thought you might like to come along, see a bit more of the territory. Mrs. Benton said she'd watch the children." The invitation surprised her. "Right now, if you're not too tired from teaching," he said. "Figure we'd be back by nightfall, weather's holding clear and the road's good." The opportunity to spend time alone with Yancey was too tempting to resist. "Let me get my coat," she agreed. 20 minutes later, they were heading out of town, the wagon rolling smoothly along the well-traveled road. The mountains rose majestically around them, their peaks already dusted with snow. The air was crisp and clear, carrying the scent of pine and the promise of winter. "It's beautiful country," Abigail observed, drinking in the scenery. "That it is," Yancey agreed. "Different from what you're used to, I expect." "Very," she admitted. "Boston has its charms, but nothing like this vastness. I feel both insignificant and free out here." Yancey nodded in understanding. "That's what drew me west. Space to breathe, to be your own man. No one looking over your shoulder, judging you by your family name or where you came from." Is that how it was for you back east? She asked, realizing she knew little of his life before Montana. Pennsylvania, he corrected. Coal mining town. My father worked the mines his whole life, died of the black lung before he saw 40. I was heading the same way before the war came. He adjusted his hat against the sun. What about you? What was Boston like? Abigail considered how to explain a world so different from his experience. Confined, she finally said. Not just physically, though the city is crowded, but socially there are so many rules, so many expectations. Who you can speak to, how you must dress, what opinions you're permitted to voice, especially as a woman. And you didn't fit those expectations, Yancey guessed. Not very well, she admitted with a small smile. I was too bookish, too opinionated, too plain. The last word slipped out before she could reconsider it, a truth she rarely acknowledged aloud. Yancey glanced at her sharply. Plain, you? Embarrassed, Abigail looked away. It's all right. I've always known I'm not a beauty. In Boston, that matters a great deal, especially for a woman without fortune. Look at me, Abigail, Yancey said, his voice gentle but firm. Reluctantly, she met his gaze. I'm not much for fancy words, he said, but whoever gave you that idea was blind as a cave bat. There's nothing plain about you. You're kind, she demurred, but I've faced mirrors my whole life. Then your mirrors in Boston must be faulty, he insisted. Because I see a woman whose eyes light up when she's teaching something she loves, whose smile can make a room brighter. Whose kindness has won over every child in that schoolhouse, including my two. His earnestness made her throat tight with emotion. Yancey, I'm not finished, he continued. Maybe in Boston they value painted dolls with empty heads. Out here we value substance, courage, heart. And you've got those in abundance. They rode in silence for a long moment, Abigail overwhelmed by his words and the intensity behind them. Thank you, she finally said softly. He nodded, seemingly embarrassed by his own outburst. Just stating facts as I see them. The remaining journey passed pleasantly, their conversation turning to lighter topics, stories about the children, local characters, plans for the school's Christmas pageant. By the time they reached Clearwater, a larger settlement that served as the region's railway hub, they had regained their usual easy rapport. Yancey efficiently loaded his supplies, equipment for the ranch, material for winter repairs, and a few items he wouldn't specify, setting them aside with mysterious care. As they prepared for the return journey, the western sky darkened with heavy clouds. Might be in for some weather, Yancey observed, frowning at the horizon. Better head back quick. They had covered perhaps half the distance to Silver Creek when the storm struck a fierce, early blizzard that reduced visibility to mere feet. The temperature plummeted, and soon the road was obscured by driving snow. We can't make it back to town in this, Yancey shouted over the howling wind. My line shack's about a mile off the main road. We'll head there. Abigail nodded, too cold to speak. She had dressed warmly for an autumn day, not a winter storm, and despite the blanket Yancey had wrapped around her shoulders, she was shivering violently. The journey to the line shack seemed endless, the wagon moving at an agonizing crawl through deepening snow. When a small cabin finally emerged from the whiteness, Abigail could have wept with relief. Yancey worked quickly, unhitching the horses and leading them into a small lean-to shelter attached to the cabin. He helped Abigail down from the wagon, practically carrying her the short distance to the door as her legs had gone numb with cold. Inside, the cabin was basic but sound: a single room with a stone fireplace, a narrow cot against one wall, a rough table with 2 chairs, and shelves stocked with necessities. Yancey immediately set to building a fire while Abigail huddled near the hearth, unable to stop shaking. Need to get you warm, Yancey muttered, concern evident in his voice. The fire caught quickly, and he turned his attention to Abigail. Your clothes are soaked through. There are dry things in that chest, nothing fancy, just work clothes I keep here, but they'll be warm. He tactfully stepped outside to tend to the horses while she changed, returning with an armload of firewood just as she finished buttoning a flannel shirt that hung to her knees. She had also donned a pair of woolen socks, rolling the legs of the much too large trousers until they somewhat fit. Better? He asked, carefully averting his eyes from her unusual attire. Much, she confirmed, though embarrassment at her inappropriate dress warred with her relief at being warm and dry. Yancey busied himself preparing a simple meal from the cabin's store's beans, salt pork, and coffee. The small space warmed quickly with the fire blazing and soon filled with the scent of cooking food. Outside, the storm raged unabated. "We may be here until morning," Yancey said apologetically. "Storm like this doesn't blow itself out quick." The implications of spending the night alone with a man, even one as honorable as Yancey, were not lost on Abigail. In Boston, such a situation would mean complete social ruin. "The children will be worried," she said, focusing on the practical concern. "Mrs. Benton and Mrs. Peterson both know I wouldn't risk traveling in a blizzard," Yancey assured her. "They'll look after Emma and Joseph until we return." They ate in relative silence, the howling wind and crackling fire the only sounds. Despite the circumstances, Abigail found herself relaxing in the snug cabin, the day's exertions and emotional revelations catching up with her. "You should take the cot," Yancey said as they cleared away their simple meal. "I'll be fine by the fire." "I couldn't possibly. I've slept on worse," he interrupted with a smile. "Much worse." Too tired to argue, Abigail accepted the arrangement. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed, suddenly uncertain how to proceed in this intimate setting. Yancey seemed to sense her discomfort. "Would you like me to step out while you get settled?" "There's nowhere to go," she pointed out, gesturing to the storm raging outside the small window. "I could stand in the corner and face the wall," he suggested with a hint of humor. Not quite proper, but better than freezing to death for propriety's sake. His ability to acknowledge the awkwardness without making it worse eased her tension. "That won't be necessary," she said, slipping under the blankets fully clothed, "but thank you for your consideration." Yancey nodded and settled himself on a bedroll near the fire, keeping a respectful distance. "Rest well, Abigail." Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. She was acutely aware of Yancey's presence across the room, of the unusual intimacy created by their circumstances. After what seemed like hours, she heard his voice soft in the darkness, still awake. "Yes," she admitted. "Me too," he said. "Mind if we talk a while? Might help pass the time." "I'd like that," she replied, sitting up slightly. In the dim light of the banked fire, they spoke of things they might not have shared in daylight: childhood memories, hopes, disappointments. Yancey told her about meeting his wife, their early struggles on the ranch, the joy of their children's births, and the devastation of her illness. "I thought I'd die with her," he confessed. "If not for the children I might have. They needed me, so I had to keep going." "You've done admirably," Abigail said. "They're wonderful children, a credit to both their parents." "What about you?" Yancey asked after a moment. "No one special back in Boston," Abigail laughed softly. "Hardly. There was a young man, once a colleague at the school where I taught. I thought perhaps, but no. When he became engaged to another teacher, he told me I was such a good friend. That I was so easy to talk to, like one of the fellows." "A fool," Yancey declared flatly. "Perhaps," Abigail conceded. "Or perhaps just honest about what he wanted in a wife. Beauty, social graces, qualities I've never possessed in abundance." There was a rustle as Yancey sat up, his expression earnest in the firelight. "I told you before, Abigail, there's nothing plain about you." "I'm too plain," she admitted softly, voicing the insecurity that had followed her across a continent. Yancey moved to sit at the edge of the cot, close enough that she could see the sincerity in his eyes. The cowboy smiled and said, "I've never seen a woman so beautiful." The simple declaration, spoken with such conviction, stole her breath. Before she could formulate a response, he reached out slowly, as if giving her time to withdraw, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "May I kiss you, Abigail?" he asked, his voice husky. Unable to speak, she nodded. His lips were gentle against hers, the kiss tender and undemanding. When he pulled back, his eyes searched hers, looking for any sign of regret or discomfort. "I've wanted to do that for weeks," he admitted. "Why didn't you?" she whispered. "Wasn't sure you'd welcome it," he said honestly. "You're educated, refined. I'm just a rancher with dirt under my fingernails and calluses on my hands." "Your hands are perfect," Abigail said, surprising herself with her boldness. She reached for one of them, tracing the lines on his palm. They've built a home, raised children, worked honest labor. What could be more admirable than that? Yancey turned his hand to clasp hers. You're not what I expected when I heard Silver Creek was getting an Eastern schoolteacher. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? She asked, suddenly uncertain. The best thing, he assured her, bringing her hand to his lips. Now get some sleep. Storm might break by morning and we'll have a long ride back. He returned to his bedroll, but Abigail felt the shift between them as tangibly as the warmth from the fire. Something had changed, something significant and potentially wonderful. She slept deeply, waking to the silence that follows a heavy snow. Yancey was already up, stoking the fire and preparing coffee. Outside, the world was transformed, blanketed in white, pristine and still under a clear blue sky. Morning, he greeted her with a smile that held new warmth. Storm's past. We can head back once we've eaten. They shared a simple breakfast, both somewhat shy in the light of day after the previous night's revelations. As they prepared to depart, Abigail changed back into her own clothes, now dry from hanging near the fire overnight. The journey back to Silver Creek was slow but peaceful, the wagon cutting through fresh snow under a brilliant sky. They spoke little, but the silence was comfortable, filled with shared understanding. As they approached town, however, Abigail grew anxious. People will talk, she said. When they learn we spent the night away from town. Let them, Yancey replied calmly. We did nothing wrong. Got caught in a storm, took shelter. Anyone with sense would have done the same. Some won't see it that way, she persisted. I'm a teacher. I'm held to certain standards of behavior. Yancey's expression grew serious. Abigail, look at me. When she met his gaze, he continued, I respect you. I'd never do anything to harm your reputation. If anyone speaks ill of you because of this, they'll answer to me. His protectiveness touched her deeply. Thank you, she said softly, but I'm concerned about the children too. They need their teacher to be above reproach. The children need a teacher who shows good judgment, Yancey countered. Freezing to death for the sake of appearances wouldn't have served them well. Despite his reassurances, Abigail braced herself for disapproval as they entered town. To her surprise, they were met not with condemnation but with relief. Thank the Lord you're both all right, Mrs. Benton exclaimed, rushing to meet them. We were sick with worry when that storm hit. Mr. Thompson was organizing a search party for First Light if you hadn't returned. Word spread quickly that the schoolteacher and the rancher had weathered the blizzard safely, and if there were whispers about impropriety, they were largely drowned out by the community's relief at their safe return. Emma and Joseph flung themselves at their father the moment he stepped into Mrs. Peterson's home, then surprised Abigail by including her in their exuberant welcome. We were scared, Emma admitted, her small arms tight around Abigail's waist. I'm sorry you worried, Abigail said, stroking the child's hair, but your father took very good care of me. He knew exactly what to do to keep us safe. Pa's good at taking care of people, Joseph said with obvious pride. Ma always said so. Later, as Yancey prepared to take the children back to the ranch, he drew Abigail aside. I meant what I said last night, he told her quietly, every word. So did I, she replied, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. May I call on you properly? Sunday dinner with the children is fine, but that is, I hope we might. Yes, Abigail said simply, saving him from his uncharacteristic stumbling. I'd like that very much. As winter settled over Silver Creek, Abigail's relationship with Yancey deepened. He called on her regularly, sometimes bringing the children, sometimes alone. They shared meals, conversations, quiet evenings by the fire at the boarding house under Mrs. Benton's watchful but approving eye. The Christmas pageant brought the community together, with Abigail's students performing the nativity story to proud parents. Afterward, Yancey presented her with a gift, a finely crafted wooden box inlaid with a pattern of books and flowers. I made it, he said somewhat self-consciously. Not as fine as something from a Boston shop, but it's perfect, Abigail interrupted, running her fingers over the smooth wood. The most thoughtful gift I've ever received. For New Year's, he invited her to the ranch, her first visit to his home. The house was modest but well built, with 3 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, and a comfortable sitting room dominated by a stone fireplace. What struck Abigail most was how much it felt like a home, not just a house. Sarah's touch was still evident in certain details: handmade curtains, a collection of books, a quilt draped over the sofa, but Yancey and the children had clearly made it their own. Over a special dinner, prepared by Yancey himself with enthusiastic, if somewhat messy assistance from Emma, Abigail found herself thinking that this was what she had been seeking all along. Not just a place to teach, but a place to belong. As they sat by the fire after the children had gone to bed, Yancey took her hand. "I have something to ask you," he said, his expression serious. Abigail's heart quickened. "Yes, the children are getting attached to you," he began, then paused. "That's not quite right." "We're all getting attached to you. I don't want to rush you, but I need to know if you see a future here, in Silver Creek, with us." "Are you asking if I intend to stay?" Abigail clarified, wanting to be sure of his meaning. "I'm asking if you could see yourself making a life here," Yancey said carefully. "The teaching position is secure, of course, but beyond that, with me and the children, as a family." The word hung in the air between them, full of hope and possibility. "I came to Silver Creek looking for a place where I could be valued for what I do, not judged for what I am not," Abigail said slowly. "I found that here, but I found something else too, something I wasn't looking for but now can't imagine being without." "What's that?" Yancey asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "You," she said simply, "and Emma and Joseph. The way I feel when I'm with you, like I don't have to pretend or try to be someone else, like I'm enough just as I am." Yancey's smile was radiant. "More than enough," he assured her, "so much more." He rose from his chair and, to her astonishment, knelt before her. "I'm not a man of fancy words," he said, taking both her hands in his, "but I know what's in my heart. I love you, Abigail Lawson. I want to build a life with you, raise these children with you, grow old with you. Will you marry me?" Tears filled Abigail's eyes. "Are you certain?" "I'm not if you say you're plain one more time," Yancey interrupted with gentle firmness. "I might have to spend the rest of our lives convincing you otherwise, which I'm prepared to do, by the way." A laugh bubbled up through Abigail's tears. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you, Yancey Fairchild." The wedding took place in early spring as the snow receded and the first wildflowers appeared on the hillsides. The entire town turned out for the occasion, the little church filled to capacity. Emma served as flower girl, scattering petals with enthusiastic abandon, while Joseph stood proudly beside his father as best man. Abigail wore a simple dress of ivory silk, her one concession to Boston fashion, sent by her sisters when they learned of her engagement. Her hair was arranged in soft curls rather than her usual severe bun, and she carried a bouquet of early spring blooms gathered by Emma that morning. As she walked down the aisle toward Yancey, Abigail felt none of the self-consciousness that had plagued her at social gatherings in the past. His face as he watched her approach, full of love, admiration, and a touch of wonder, banished any lingering doubts. "You're breathtaking," he whispered as she reached him. The ceremony was brief and heartfelt. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Yancey kissed her with a tenderness that brought fresh tears to her eyes. As they turned to face their friends and neighbors, Emma could contain herself no longer and rushed forward to embrace them both, quickly followed by Joseph. The celebration afterward was joyous, a true community affair with music, dancing, and enough food to feed half the territory. As dusk fell, Yancey and Abigail slipped away from the festivities, leaving the children in Mrs. Peterson's care for the night. He had prepared the house for their return, with flowers in every room and candles casting a warm glow over their home now truly theirs together. That night, as they discovered each other in the most intimate way, Abigail finally understood what Yancey had been trying to tell her all along. In his eyes, in his touch, in his whispered words of love, she was beautiful. The years that followed brought changes to the Fairchild family. Abigail continued teaching, but now rode to the schoolhouse each day from the ranch rather than walking from the boarding house. The ranch prospered under Yancey's careful management, expanding to become one of the most successful in the area. Emma and Joseph thrived with Abigail's influence in their lives. Joseph, following in his father's footsteps, developed a keen interest in ranching and the natural sciences. Emma, much to everyone's amusement, declared at age 10 that she intended to become a doctor like her maternal grandfather, a dream that Abigail and Yancey fully supported. In their second year of marriage, Abigail gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, after Yancey's first wife, a gesture that seemed right to them both, acknowledging the woman whose love had helped shape the man Abigail adored. 2 years later, a son arrived named Michael after Abigail's father. As Silver Creek grew from a settlement into a proper town, the Fairchilds remained at its heart. Yancey served on the town council, while Abigail expanded the school, eventually hiring additional teachers as the population increased. Together, they built not just a family but a legacy of service to the community that had embraced them. On their 10th anniversary, Yancey presented Abigail with a special gift, a locket containing miniature portraits of their 4 children. As she admired it, tears welling in her eyes, he wrapped his arms around her from behind. "Happy?" he asked, his voice still holding the power to send a shiver through her after all these years. "Completely," she assured him, leaning back against his solid strength. "Sometimes I can hardly believe this is my life. If you hadn't fixed that schoolhouse roof, I'd have found another excuse to talk to you," he said with a chuckle. "I was smitten from the first moment I saw you standing in that schoolyard, covered in dust but looking like you belonged there. And I thought you were just being kind to the plain new teacher," she teased, their old exchange now a fond joke between them. "Never been plain a day in your life," Yancey insisted, turning her to face him. His hair was beginning to silver at the temples, and the lines around his eyes had deepened, but his gaze held the same warmth it always had. "Most beautiful woman I've ever seen from that first day until now." As he kissed her, Abigail reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had come to Montana Territory seeking a place where she could be valued for her abilities rather than judged for her appearance. Instead, she had found a man who saw beauty where she had never recognized it herself, children who filled her heart with joy, and a community that had become truly home. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and crimson, their children playing in the yard before them, Abigail felt a contentment so complete it brought tears to her eyes. "What is it?" Yancey asked, noticing her emotion. "Just thinking," she said, her hand finding his, "about how sometimes the greatest adventures begin with the smallest steps. Coming to Silver Creek was meant to be an escape. I never imagined it would lead me to everything I never knew I wanted." Yancey squeezed her hand. "Best decision you ever made," he said with a grin. "Well, second best. Marrying me was clearly the best." Abigail laughed, the sound joining the chorus of their children's voices on the evening air. "No argument there, Mr. Fairchild." As darkness fell and they called the children in for supper, Abigail took one last look at the vast Montana sky, now ablaze with stars. The Boston schoolteacher who had once felt so plain, so overlooked, had found her place in the vastness of the frontier not by changing who she was, but by discovering someone who saw her true worth all along. And that, she reflected as Yancey's arm slipped around her waist, guiding her back into the warmth of their home, was the greatest adventure of all.